everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent, and today we're going to be doing the last of our level 0 top 10s with Rogue, and also the only video in this group that I've had to re-record. There are 3 separate reasons I felt the need to re-record the Rogue top 10. The first one is that Fox Mask came out, and that does impact my decisions a lot. The second one is that Rogues have a lot of terrible cards, so I was very salty the first time I made this video, and I didn't like the attitude I had. The third reason that I felt the need to re-record this video is I think Rogues need an honorable mentions to discuss some of the things that identify Rogues and some of the things that don't make it into this list. So coming up here, first off I want to talk about Rogue weapons, specifically Mauser and Knuckle Dusters, because the other ones may as well not exist for most characters. But in the same vein, like while I could argue the 25 automatic exists, I could also argue the Knuckle Duster doesn't exist unless you have Dirty Fighting or specifically R-Tony. Rogue weapons are incredibly problematic. All of them have some Achilles heel. Whether that's a requirement to dodge, giving retaliate, or on an auto fail your gun just stops being a gun. Like all of them have some glaring problem. So even though some of them are very good, like Knuckle Dusters and Mausers are legitimately very good weapons despite their drawbacks, you end up in a situation where putting them in your top 10 implies a level of universal power that just isn't true. Most rogues aren't fighters, and most fighter rogues still only use them begrudgingly. All of the weapons have some sort of drawback that prevents me from putting them in my top 10, even though I do think some of them are quite good and worth an honorable mention. Something that definitely deserves an honorable mention is Pilfer, because a lot of the times when you're looking at a Foot Matters rogue, the entire puzzle is just how do I play Pilfer and make it work? How do I pass a really important foot check and beat the entire bag for 3 clues? And later on, the entire bag by 2 with Pilfer 3, but Pilfer is very much the heart of a Foot Matters archetype. If you're playing Foot Matters without Pilfer, it really makes you question why Pilfer isn't in your deck and why you've gone for Foot Matters in the first place. That said, because Pilfer is a card that proposes a massive problem where your entire deck is now trying to pay for this and then continue to function outside of the turns with Pilfer, despite Pilfer being very strong, it creates so many deck building problems that I don't feel comfortable putting in my top 10. The reason Thieves Kit is next to Pilfer is very much for a similar reason. Not that you have trouble paying for it or warp your whole deck around it, but when you start making that Foot Matters build, you realize you desperately need to increase your foot, and that's just not very easy to do. At least it used to not be very easy to do. We're getting more and more ways to do it as the game progresses, and Foot Matters is starting to hit a critical mass. And part of that critical mass is Grift. Grift does 2 things. First, being a Foot Matters economy card, it sort of connects the big money and the Foot Matters archetypes. It bridges that gaps and helps those decks come together. But the other thing it does is being a trick that tests a skill, it pushes Foot Matters a lot more towards Chuck, where you just need a certain number of trick events in your deck to make Chuck work. And with a spoiled card that is not actually previewed, it is leaked, I don't know if I should be talking about it, the Tricks Matter Foot Matters archetype is getting a lot closer to being real, and we're very close to hitting critical mass with all of the Foot Matters and Trick stuff and Chuck Fergus and all of that. And with Well Connected, it's obviously here because Big Money Rogue is so impactful, but Big Money Rogue is usually not happening at level 0. Putting Well Connected as the best level 0 card seems disingenuous when Well Connected tends to be in a deck between scenarios 3 and 5, and after that you upgrade out of it, and before that you adapt when to it. You don't run it at level 0, right? So Well Connected, despite being a very impactful card to the Rogue archetype, isn't really a level 0 card. It doesn't see enough play for me to justify putting it in my top 10. And with all of that out of the way, let's get into our actual top 10, starting with number 10, Nimble. Nimble is just shortcut in disguise. You do a foot test, when it passes, you move up to 3 times. You can really see how strong this is on someone like Parallel Skids, where not only is this helping you make money, but it's basically just shortcut. You don't need to find a foot test, you can do a foot test literally whenever. But in every Foot Matters character, where you are just desperate for every foot icon you can get, every action you can get, Nimble is very, very valuable. It's also sort of emblematic of the problem for Foot Matters that even the really strong cards are just janky enough that you can't reliably get value out of them. Nimble's great, but you specifically need to be doing a foot test before moving for it to be great, and that's the problem with it. That's the jank inherent in it that holds it back from being much, much better, because if this were just question mark move 3 times, it'd be insane, but the conditions really hold it at a reasonable power level, and you're kind of looking for broken shit, not reasonable shit. At number 9, we have a card that some people might rank quite a lot higher in Breaking and Entering. I personally don't see Breaking and Entering get played much at my table, and a big part of that is that you have to need to evade the guy for this to be good, right? I'm not spending 2 resources to add foot to book for 1 investigate check. That's not nearly good enough. Just use lockpicks, right? This is only good enough when you are specifically going to evade an enemy, and that is already the best game plan you have. And somebody like Finn or Kaimani, breaking and entering is nuts, because you're getting free action evades. Actually, this isn't an evade check, so it doesn't work on Finn, but you're building your deck around evading them. So even though you aren't getting the free action evade, say you fail your evade or there are multiple enemies, or you don't want to evade over, but you have dirty fighting, there are plenty of reasons in a Finn where you would breaking and entering and then kill the guy. And in Kaimani, obviously, you need to evade people. This allows you to effectively evade without engaging, and engaging is what holds Kaimani down. And those characters breaking and entering is nuts. And somebody like Trish, breaking and entering can let you go first and trigger your Trish ability. But just generically in a vacuum, if you have no synergies, how often do you want to both evade and find a clue? It's really not that often. And costing 2 resources is not a negligible amount. And a class where if you're using breaking and entering, it implies you might care about Pilfer, so you need tons of resources. Everyone's looking at Leo. Leo costs 6 resources. Rogue is so expensive that if you don't have specific synergies with breaking and entering, I don't really think it's that insane. It's just good enough. But when you have those synergies, breaking and entering turns into one of the best cards in the deck. And also, why'd it zoom in more? What? There's a certain spot on the card where it zooms in really badly? I don't know. Anyway, moving on to number 8, we have Lonnie Ritter. I have a lot of negative shit to say about the rogue weapons because the rogue weapons are inherently built with negative shit attached to them. That's their identity. Good weapon, but that's how rogue weapons work. Lonnie Ritter is not just a great level 0 fighting ally. She's the only good level 0 rogue ally. All the rogue allies are some crazy gimmicky shit with like a paragraph explaining how they're gonna do nothing. And Lonnie's just like 4 cost, 2/3 soak, gives you +1 fist. Already just like good enough to see play, but also she gives you a literally infinite soak combo because you put a horror on Lonnie, a damage on your trench coat or whatever other asset you're playing, usually heavy furs, and then you heal both of them for a resource. Lonnie Ritter gives you infinite soak in a class that struggles with the Mythos phase. She gives you fists that you desperately need on every rogue fighter. Unlike the weapons, rogues have one of the best fight allies in the entire game, and Lonnie Ritter does a ton of heavy lifting for that archetype. Coming in at number 7, we have Quick Thinking. Quick Thinking is just good. It is just a skill that will give you an action. That's how it usually goes. Obviously, it can fail. You don't want to use this on a hard check, you want to use it on an easy check. So it should be beating the bag, even beating Curse Cascades. But the ability to convert a card in your hand into an action is just a very, very powerful amount of tempo. For a lot of the same reasons that Live and Learn is good, Quick Thinking is also good. Quick Thinking, I would say, is definitely worse, but you can also use it in turns that don't fail, so it increases your maximum output in a way that Live and Learn doesn't. It's a very, very good card. Any top 10 rogue list should include Quick Thinking. It's the most obvious, non-debatable card in my top 10, I would say. Coming in at number 6, we have Intel Report. It's just unambiguously good. Spending 4 resources for 2 clues is very solid, especially in a class that has a bad habit of A, having more money than it needs, and B, failing tests that it shouldn't. So Intel Report plays to both the strengths and weaknesses of rogues to do the thing you need to progress the game at a very good rate. That said, it's not like super insane, it's just fine. Intel Report's at its best when you're spending 6 to avoid a move action, but that's very rarely actually the case. It's still a great card, but I don't think it's that insane, and I find myself more and more often having Intel Report be a good card in a deck where it was like the 26th or 28th card I was adding. And if Intel Report is the thing my deck does that is good, I'm like looking at a really bad Ginny deck. Intel Report can't be the best thing your deck does. It can't be your main game plan, but it is incredibly good in addition to any functional deck. At number 5, we have a card that isn't in the game yet. Much like Sparrow Mask, I think Fox Mask is going to be nuts. At the start of this, when I was talking about how Foot Matters is finally reaching critical mass, this is a big part of what I'm talking about. If your deck is built to use Pilfer and you're struggling to make sure you can beat the bag on Pilfer, recursive manual decks is really good. It's also very likely that this Foot Matters Kluber you have can pass a book test if you have +2, has other ways of leveraging their foot. This is just a very, very important card, and in a lot of ways it's sort of like a level 0 Chuck Fergus. Not quite, but it's sort of filling that same role before Chuck enters the deck. Fox Mask is just desperately needed for every single character trying to use the Foot Matters archetype. You can make arguments about the quality of Foot Matters, but I think this is the most powerful card in that deck, and it is single-handedly enabling reliability in a class that otherwise desperately lacked it for that archetype. Also, like, it does help in the Mythos phase, it's Cryptual fodder, it's dirt cheap, but the main thing is, if you've ever tried to make Pilfer work and went into scenario 0 and just spent location after location after location looking at Pilfer and being like, yeah, I really wish I had manual decks in hand or the shroud value wasn't 4, that's why this is good. This gets you over a hump that the class just previously could not reliably do, especially in scenario 1. Coming in at number 4, we have I'll Take That. This is a criminally underplayed card at my table. It's essentially a fast emergency cash that also makes the next item asset you play fast. Of course, you have to successfully investigate by X, where X is the amount you succeed by, but like we just talked about breaking and entering, we just talked about using Fox Mask so that Pilfer beats the entire bag. At the start of the video when we talked about Foot Matters, Lockpicks is one of those cards that's carrying its weight but not making the archetype good enough, and cards like I'll Take That convert a Lockpicks check where you were previously just reliably getting a clue into something that enables this card to cheat out multiple actions for you. I'll Take That is incredibly efficient, provided you can actually investigate at big numbers, which is something rogues often struggle with doing, but as more and more cards enter the pool, rogues get better and better at doing that. Speaking of payoff for over-succeeding, at number 3 we have Lucky Cigarette Case. Pretty much every time I make a rogue deck, my entire draw is Easy Mark and Lucky Cigarette Case. I always want more than that, but I can never find more, and then when I sit down to play the deck, I never needed more because Lucky Cigarette Case just does so much work. For 2 costs and a relatively uncontested asset slot, this is going to draw you a card pretty much every turn. It is very, very good, and one of the few cards in Rogue that even Seekers envy. And at number 2, we have Faustian Bargain. This is just the best economy card in the game, and it's so incredibly strong that it is one of the best cards in the game, full stop. Not level 0 cards, not economy cards, just one of the best cards there is. Gaining 5 resources for the negligible cost of 2 curse tokens is already great, but very often this is like e-cash for yourself and you give 1 resource to each teammate, and that 1 resource saves them an action that would otherwise have been a resource action. Faustian Bargain is just a tremendous amount of positive tempo for your team, in addition to being brute force economy. Like Hot Streak level 2 is Faustian Bargain, but sometimes you can't play it in exchange for not putting curse tokens in the bag. Faustian Bargain is such an incredibly strong card, and no other economy card even comes close. And lastly, we have the reason you need all these economy cards. It's Leo DeLuca in our number 1 spot. Yes, he costs 6 and takes up your ally slot, and that's a huge problem because, like, you know, rogues don't do a lot without assets, so it's turn 1, you play Faustian Bargain, Leo DeLuca, you have 4 resources and 2 actions. That's not enough to finish setting up. You've got more in front of you. You have like an entire second turn of setup. You're gonna need to like play e-cash, lockpicks, some other shit like a Fox Mask, and it just takes a lot to set up when you run Leo DeLuca. But the payoff of getting 33% more turn every turn is absolutely massive. There are other cards in the game that do similar things. Safeguard is very often a 2-cost Leo DeLuca because you needed to move anyway, so the condition didn't matter. I don't think Leo DeLuca is as good as Safeguard, but I do think Leo DeLuca is one of the best cards in the game, and I think a huge part of why Rogues sucked a lot for the first several expansions is the developers were afraid of printing good cards in the class with Leo DeLuca, because what he offers is genuinely unambiguously incredible. It just takes a lot of resources to do it, in a class that very frequently doesn't have a good basic action to spend this on, so you'll have to jump through hoops to set up even more. But once you have jumped through all the hoops, Leo DeLuca is a card worth working for. He is incredibly strong, but he's also very basic, so I feel no further need to go on about it. And before I leave this level 0 rogue video, I want to have a brief aside about the Foot Matters archetype, which has always been tied to Chuck Fergus, because the big Foot Matters events are all things that Chuck Fergus works on since he is affecting specifically tactics and tricks, and all of the big ones are tricks. Sneak by has always been awkward to include. It's just not great value unless you're specifically Fen or Kaimani. But now that Grift has also been added to the pool, we sort of hit that critical mass of events where if you're playing a Chuck deck, you can expect to hit something that Chuck works on in a way that you couldn't before. And I think that does a lot, not just to push Foot Matters, but to push Chuck into a core position in that archetype. And that's something that really helps the archetype, because again, the reason Sparrow Mask is here is as a placeholder for Fox Mask. You really need to make these checks reliable. And when you upgrade these cards, you need to make them reliable by over-succeeding so that you can recur them. And I don't know if Fox Mask is a level 0 stand-in for Chuck or if you run both, but this is a ton of support and it's really starting to hit critical mass where the archetype has a good reason to get played that I really felt like it didn't previously have. The biggest reason that I'm having this aside, though, is I don't want to have a whole video about a spoiled card that might not actually be a preview. There are some card leaks that aren't official previews. Bewitching was one of them. My table is going to be calling this Trick to the Plan. Assuming this is a real card, it is a 6 experience rogue permanent, it's a 3 cost exceptional, and it's Stick to the Plan, but specifically with tricks. The way you get them is reaction. When you engage an enemy, you exhaust Bewitching, draw the attached card, or search the top 9 cards of your deck for an attached card and draw that one instead. If this is real, Chuck Fergus decks get so much better. Now, A, just like Stick to the Plan, your deck is 3 cards smaller, making Chuck more reliable, but B, you put like Breaking and Entering, Sneak By, and Grift under Bewitching, and now when you draw an enemy, the first time you search your top 9, you probably hit one of these other ones, or if you just want to be safe, you take one, and you can have Sneak By guaranteed or Grift guaranteed the moment an enemy shows up. You can get your Breaking and Entering 2 really reliably on Kaimani. This is what critical mass looks like. This is going to reshape the way I view level 0 rogues, and shit like this is why I am so incredibly hyped for the next expansion. They've printed stuff like Fox Mask and Bewitching that directly pushes the archetype that's been a meme at my table for so bloody long. They printed more Curse and Bless support. If you're aware of where these leaks are coming from, you're also aware they're printing experienced versions of the Dark Horse archetype. We finally have an expansion that's not afraid to explicitly support weak archetypes from the past, and I am so happy to see it. This is something I've been wanting for a long time, to the point where I would be like a fan if they had just announced an Investigator expansion that had no associated campaign expansion that was only to support previous things that weren't fleshed out. And to some degree, that's what all of this is, and I'm super hyped about it. I'm looking forward to playing I'm looking forward to playing rogues that are actually playing Foot Matters because it feels good, and not because I want to be different and I'm tired of playing big money. Anyway, now that I've rambled about Trick to the Plan for a hot second, and the critical mass the Foot Matters archetype appears to be approaching, where it becomes a genuinely competitively viable. Competitively viable is an interesting term in this game, since it is fundamentally cooperative, but I mean like competitive with other decks. Anyways, I've completely lost track of where I was, and I'm sure I'm rambling off topic, so let's wrap it up here. I've been Rather Incoherent. Thank you for watching. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, Evan and Jeffrey B, as well as Adam F, and I'll be seeing all of you in the next one. Oh, and by the way, the next one's my serious power ranking tier list. It's 2.5 hours long. Hope you're looking forward to that.